So for those who came late and missed the best first minutes, you'll have the recording. Cool. So Carlos, so happy to have you here. I welcome everyone in. So we have had a lot of conversations this year about personal branding, and I think when we talk about personal branding, I think we tend to overlook this one really important aspect of it, which is that, like, in order to do any sort of self-promotion, you really have to get comfortable, I think, with what you're trying to say, and that's all about finding your voice, right? So I was really excited to be able to speak to you on that topic, because I think, Carlos, you have a great voice and you use it really well, and so who better to talk about this than you? Do you think you actually have you found your own voice? Is that a accurate description of you?
So I'll maybe can break it down into two aspects to it. There's acoustically, have I found my own voice? I think I have. And then in terms of a message, have I found my own voice? Still looking for it. I think I've found bits of it, kind of still collecting bits as I kind of search around. It's a work in progress, but I feel more comfortable with when I think of finding my own voice in that way, comfortable in sharing my perspectives and my premise as to on various topics. But acoustically, I used to feel I had a really horrible nasal voice when I would record on audio, and it's just like, I don't want to be recorded ever. But I think I've learned to, tune that bit out. So more happy to just talk on camera.
Yeah. I'm very curious how everyone else in this group would answer that question. So do you feel like you found your voice in whatever way you define that for yourself? If you want to share in the chat, or if you're eager to turn the microphone on and actually use your voice right now. Welcome to. Oh, Thu is in a dark room. Thu, yeah, I was asking, do you feel like you found your voice? Mark is still searching.
I think I can jump in with my flu-riddled voice. I think I'm still fiddling about, which makes this conversation really timely to learn from Carlos and everyone else who's either found theirs or is still searching.
Cool. What is intensely looking for your voice? What does that look like for you, Ani?
Well, I'm actually spending like the last month of the year, the last working month of the year, really like zooming in on producing my content, redoing my website, like looking for messaging, but also I've been for about, well, I don't know, for a few weeks, I've been really making an effort to like show up every day and like do a practice of expressing my ideas on various topics, just even for myself, because I mean, there's so many conversations, and I don't know, so it's really like training myself to be comfortable with expressing an idea that very often will be, for example, different. Even today, I've seen two things on LinkedIn where my fingers were like this, and I was like, think about it first, sit down and write it down. So I think, it's, but I'm really zooming in on it for this, like now this month, to hopefully be able then to put some content out.
Cool. So I think the way that you phrase that, like, how do I express my opinions? How do I express my ideas? I think that's really at the core of it for me as well. Cool. So Carlos, we know you through a lot of beautiful reflections and opinions that you share through Happy Startup School. were you born able to express your ideas well, or is this something you've nurtured over the years?
Yes, I was born that way. Well, I was told I was that way as a child. I was a precocious, confident child. Then life battered that out of me for a little bit. Whether that was through being teased or being told you're too full of yourself, or rejection, those things that builds the cynic in us sometimes. And so I think it was always in there. Its confidence was knocked for a while. And there was, I think, a process, at least over the past 10 years, of giving myself permission to have an opinion and not worrying that someone else may have already had that opinion before me. And so, we have a hand going up. Nina.
Yeah, I think you just phrased this really well, and I can very much relate to that. You know, as I'm in like the process of finding my voice, as in, you know, okay, what do I want to be known for? Like, which hat am I going to wear? Being also more like of a generalist in what I'm offering professionally. But indeed, I do struggle, and I think that have not been really addressed, or is rarely addressed, that I am a quite confident person, but I also really think, yeah, everyone had this thought X already. This is not original. That's why I admire people who, you know, write books, because I would think, well, you know, does the world need one more story, one more perspective? Has not been everything, you know, said about branding or so that is that to be said. So I think this is important, like this, that really, like, you know, it doesn't matter really, you know, give yourself permission, and maybe that's your opinion this week, and be kind of generous with myself, as in, okay, maybe in March I think what I said in November is silly, but so what, right? Like, I don't judge others for it, so why would I be so hard on myself?
I also think there's a framing around this of when you express an opinion, or actually when you express something, whether you are just copying someone else, so you heard that, so you're going to say it because that sounded good, versus I want to say this thing because I really believe it. Oh, and someone else has said that before me. And I think they're two very different energies. One is truly your voice, and the other is you're stealing someone else's to look good, even if it's exactly the same message. So yeah, that's, I think, for me, something I've been trying to lean into more, not feeling like, no, I don't want to, I think maybe it's from school. You're not allowed to copy people. You got to be original. You got to be different. You got to do your own work. But I found also through re-articulating things that I've heard and trying to explain them in my own language, that's been a really helpful way as well to find my own voice, because then I can give my own, offer my own spin on something that someone else has said, and then through that develop an idea on my own perspective. I see Nirish's hand up.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've realized recently is, for example, if you know, we all can say, "Hey, the sky is blue," right? Which is an obvious fact. Everyone knows that. Everyone can say that, and there's no uniqueness in that. But if I say, you know, the sky is blue, and it reminds me of, for example, my childhood growing up in Nepal, that itself makes it a bit more unique in terms of like brings in your own flavor to it. And Carlos can't say that, you know, he wasn't born in Nepal. So that is in itself kind of makes it unique. Like, you know, we're both are saying that staying the same obvious fact, but we're kind of putting our own personal story and lived experience into it. And that's something that I'd never had, I think, confidence kind of incorporating into my stories, like my own lived experience and who I am. And a lot of times that was because I didn't know myself either. So now I think I feel more confident in getting in touch with my own origins and my own lived experiences, and then, you know, making that as being a part of my brand.
And I like how Nirish has brought in this idea of your own stories. I think there's a value in writing your own narrative about your life that then helps you understand, or even just paint a picture of your perspective because of these lived experiences, and how you connect the dots, whether they're true or not, whether they're a manufactured narrative after the fact, but the fact that you've created a narrative, that you tried to create some kind of coherent picture, I think is part of that finding your voice, because you're not only finding it, I think you're also designing it. And I saw Anna's hand go up.
I just, on what you said and what Nirish said before, I had this because for me, in my intense search, what I said, I found myself that I just want to show like everything I know and show, okay, I'm credible, I know this, but very often I will just be repeating some like respected people's opinions, because yes, I agree with them, but it's not really setting me apart. It's kind of like defensive thing, just to show that, yeah, I know that this is look how clever I am. And I had a conversation with one of my like hero thought leaders once, and he said something what you said now. He was like, listen, you have like, everybody has unique spin because you bring in your experience, your story, and you don't have to like prove constantly that you're clever. You just have to put like everyone's story is worth telling, and like your how you say, yeah, your flavor on this. So I think it's and this really gave me confidence, because I think you have to be very confident to do that as well, because that thing that I will just say everything I know, this is not coming from a place of confidence for me. This is coming from from like, I have to prove that I know my thing.
I would like to offer a different word than confidence. Courage. I think confidence comes from practice. Confidence comes from knowing that you can do this, or knowing that you're allowed to say this, or knowing this is the right thing to say even. But sometimes we don't know whether it's the right thing to say. We don't know if people are going to receive it well. We don't know if this is what we really believe. Sometimes it's just like, oh, but it takes courage to just say it and then see where it leads. So I think if we're talking at the starting point of sharing your own voice, what's more, finding it, I think it's important to, find the courage to just have that opinion and share it. And then through practice, you get to a point of being more confident about what it is you say. Particularly when someone says, oh, that's amazing.
No, I like that.
Yeah. So on that courage, when you started, I guess, in your career, so you have a science background, then if I'm correct, you ran a design agency for the thing. Then you started the Happy Startup School. So has it that courage that you had as a kid, or the confidence that you had to get it squashed for a while when it came back up, was it natural to pick that sense of courage up again? And what did you start with when you had to share your opinions and give
So just so I understand the question, was this about finding that courage again? Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, so what I understood from it, you started with it as a kid, you felt it was very natural to have a voice, but it got kind of beaten out of you in real life. And then at some point you found the courage again.
Yeah. To
start with it. So what were the things that you started to talk about? What were the things that you started to form a vision on?
So it was in university, actually. and it was actually during when I was doing my PhD. So I studied physics, and that's a hotbed of introverts, people who just don't really want to show up too much in case they get bullied again. Enjoy sticking their heads in theory and books. So that was quite a safe place to be courageous because everyone was a bit scared. But during that, I found my little niche within my research as being the person who would talk about the research. And I actually won a couple of awards just talking about the research. And so where did the courage come from? The courage came from was like, I like the way we do this work and I want to explain it and share it. And it would be fun. And yes, it's scary because I'm going to be stood in front of a bunch of people. But at the same time, I think this is something I just want to try and do. It's something I knew it's something I enjoyed doing, explaining complex information to people, and particularly when I used to draw little pictures to make it make sense. So I think that was a reacquaintance with the courage to talk out loud, and then that's where a bit of the confidence came back. It's like, oh look, I can actually do this, and not only that, I got rewarded for doing that. Then went to the world of work, and so just didn't really I lost it a little bit because I wasn't practicing it. And also I think I would say my professional journey has been a series of existential crises. And like, am I a scientist? Am I a web designer? Am I a community builder? Am I a coach? Who am I? And I think part of this finding my own voice is also part of defining my own identity and trying to tell a story about who that is. And so I think over time I've created a story that actually studying science, particularly physics, there was always a quest to try to understand how the world worked, except I was trying to do it through numbers rather than through conversations and meeting people. And so now I'm doing it through a more lived experience rather than the theoretical one. And so that's what weaves it in together. And so my curiosity about how everything works has weaved through my work now as it did as my work at the beginning. And that's given me a perspective that is both at a very macroscopic, infinite scale. It's like, wow, we are in a place that has what feels like we're a microscopic dot on a microscopic dot in the infinite universe. And we tell stories about how this universe works based on being human beings. And we think science is the thing that saves us. And I've discovered actually below that, every scientist is a human who is driven by emotions and their own limiting beliefs about what's possible and what's not. And so it all seems to tie together, that it's all about this human experience. And that's what I'm curious to talk about, whether that's our human experience of building businesses or our human experience of understanding ourselves and the world.
I imagine that physicists are, even if they do find their voice to talk about their work, it might be a leap for them to think about, how do I now reach an audience with this work? And how do I now speak to them in a way that they see the relevance of my work? So I'm curious, from your science background, like, is finding your voice, is that also very much linked to like finding the voice to speak to the right audience, and how do you get there? So I meet scientists who work in the field of biodiversity and conservation a lot, and like they'll do this really fundamental work. They know everything about the newt, right? And now they have to get regular people to care about the existence of newts, and that's really hard for them to learn. Like, how do I tell this story? And in my experience, scientists are not often very well equipped in making that bridge to others, but there's many other professions that aren't well equipped to making the leap to an audience.
I have a pet theory around this. So firstly, there's a difference between, as I look at it, the need to communicate and the need to be heard. And they're, for me, very different things. I think scientists, also those who work in quite specialist fields, their minds have been trained, and also maybe they are these types of people that are obsessive about detail and obsessive about truth, the objective truth. You can't dumb it down, you can't lie. This is how it works. And so, and many are introverted types, maybe a bit of a chip on their shoulder, feel a bit sensitive, so they really need to be heard. And so they latch on to the detail. They latch on to, this is how it works. This is how exactly there's a gap in knowledge and understanding because they're so wedded to the truth of the science that communication doesn't happen. But when there are many scientists like this, and particularly those who teach, when there's this need to communicate, to see that someone else understands, and there's this flexibility with the truth, and that comes the detail, they are able to create analogies, they create metaphors that are approximations of what's really happening in their work, but at least gives the audience, the person they're talking to, whether they are a policymaker or member of the public or a customer, an ability to say, okay, I see it's like how, I don't know, snooker balls move around the table. That's how atoms work. Okay, I get it. That makes sense to me. That may not be true, but it gives them something to hold on to. So I think that gap in communication of whether it's science or any complex idea could be like, some of the intricacies of the psychology of branding, or how society works, those kinds of things. Unless you're able to understand, or how to put it, unless you're willing to sit in the audience's shoes and you want them to understand rather than just hear you, then I don't think communication works. So I think it's in the mind of the person who's speaking to have a very clear intention that this person who I'm talking to, I really want them to get to hear. And that being an understanding or more knowledge for them, as opposed to, yay, you're a really good person, you said something really complicated and clever, and I don't understand. So yeah, that's my experience of scientists and communication.
I'm curious if for people who are in this group, have you ever fallen into the trap of rabbit? Or maybe it's not a trap, but do you sometimes communicate because you feel like you need to be heard rather than that you actually want to get someone on board or change someone's mind? Yeah. So I think when I heard earlier in the conversation, like how do I express my opinions, I think that ties for me into this the need to be heard, because I think we live in an age where everyone expresses their opinion, and it's a very loud time, right? And I think that puts a lot of pressure on their shoulder, and some people feel that have that inherent need of like, I need to be heard. And now other people who might not naturally feel like, well, I want to communicate, and I also feel that pressure of constantly needing to be on in terms of what is your opinion on this. And I think that stress is probably getting away from quite a few of us and actually realizing, okay, but what is it that really needs to be said right now? And who do I really want to reach? Like, who should hear this? And what do I want them to take away from? And I hear in our program so much about like that pressure And yeah, I think that pressure is really quite killing, to be honest. Do you ever feel that type of Olivia?
And just to add on a little bit on what you're saying, I sometimes feel that I'm sort of oscillating between, do I need to be heard or do I need to be understood? And that's where I'm always kind of iffy about whether my voice is really coming through as authentically as I hope it is. Yeah, that's a challenge for me.
I just wanted to, because I really like this distinction between need to be heard and need to communicate. And I think, like you said, Anna, now there's so much pressure. Oh, you need to be heard, you need to be on social media, you need to put out the content, do this, that. And yeah, and it's just like you log in on, I don't know, LinkedIn, Instagram, it's just lots of people just screaming at you your opinions, and they need to communicate. It's a different starting point. You really want to open a conversation, and I think, I mean, for me personally, if I think like that, and if I think, okay, I need to use LinkedIn, I need to be more there, but I will be there just to talk to people, it also makes it less intimidating in a way.
I think this is if I can comment. I think this is something with someone else recently described as like leading from the bench. There's so much indeed like noise and pressure and everyone giving their opinion in my field. I feel like, okay, a lot of so-called experts thinking they understand whatever, Kenya, just because they lived there now for a year. And I also lived in Kenya, and I still, after years, really would not comment on the situation of Kenyan farmers, but there comes some, foreigner, and suddenly they're experts. So I'm very critical towards this, which doesn't, I think, makes easier for people who are like me, who are like very self-critical, but also critical but towards others, like stop all that noise to really find and show our inner voice. So I found that comment on like leading from the bench quite helpful, as in seek like maybe fewer but like meaningful connections, or just reflect on that one comment instead of just liking or congrats or adding to that senseless noise. It's more like connecting on the why. Like, and it relates actually back to what Carlos said earlier, right? Like you're adding your own spin, and like if you communicate, maybe in order to be heard, but also communicating about like showing your own voice and your own spin, and that is this like perhaps a link to the why.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting aspects for me of the Happy Startup School is like, I'm sure 10 years ago when I started, because there was no lack of people talking about startups. The amount of articles and content at that time would have already been overwhelming, but somehow you managed to cut through some of that noise. And I assume, to Nina's point, that was because of your unique angle, and that unique angle came through a lived experience of what you and Lawrence went through, and the why, to Nina's point, the why you wanted to start the Happy Startup School. And I imagine now, 10 years later, if it feels almost like every niche also, like almost every niche has been taken by someone, almost every angle has been explored. But yeah, we have to have the courage to still say like, okay, yeah, there's almost 20 people in every little niche already, but still I'm going to create my own space regardless of what other people do. Was the startup school or the startup space overwhelming for you and Lawrence at the time that you got started?
Was it overwhelming? I think there's a few things that are popping into my head after what various people have said. So this is 10 years ago at least. Social media was slightly different there. I feel it felt different. Still quite noisy or busy. Twitter was a different beast then. Medium was a different platform then. And so, yeah, while there was a lot of startup talk, lots of people sharing how to be successful at startups, and to add on to this, Lawrence took the lead at that point because he was doing a lot of writing on Medium. We were coming at it from a slightly different angle. We're still talking about the same startup stuff around lean startup and iteration and experimentation and some of the same language. And I think the things that stood out most were when we started talking about happiness and startup and putting out our happy startup canvas. So giving people a new way of looking at work that wasn't just about the money. So for lots of people who felt slightly disconnected to the startup world, which was then dominated by kind of digital platforms and basically digital startups and unicorns wanting to make millions and millions or billions at the time. Having another framing where it wasn't just about the money, it was about well-being, it was about personal happiness, it was about finding balance. I think we found our own little niche in that space. Or that, if you think of what I will refer to is the personal brand challenge and the positioning work. And my axes were, if you think of the vertical one, on the top is with others, and on the bottom is self, and on the left is personal coaching or life coaching, and on the right is business, also personal and business. We were top middle. So it was community, but not just business and not just life coaching or business, personal stuff. We were in the middle there. And I couldn't think of anyone else in that space. So there was something around let's call it our own voice, whether we call it positioning, there was something about that was what we were interested in. And Lawrence wrote a lot because he was curious about it. He was really curious about that space, particularly the happiness space. And we were running a business. So how do you put those two together? And on that, and I think this is part of the challenge with this pressure to always be heard. There's something to acknowledge that the platforms that we use to allow us to be heard are based on algorithms that promote usage of the platform. And so I find it difficult to always write. I always want to have a considered response or perspective on something, which sometimes takes days for me to put together. And at the same time, if you do not like, comment, or post on a regular basis, as I understand it, these platforms will not distribute anything you put on there as widely as someone else. Yeah, because the more you post and the more you engage, the more you encourage others to post and engage. And so you are a person that benefits the platform. So if you're someone who posts on a considered slow basis and doesn't like just trawling through stuff and liking and commenting, then as a consequence of how these platforms are built, you won't be heard. So it's ironic, the people who shout loudest, well, not ironic, it's kind of matter of fact, the people who shout loudest are going to be heard most, but then the people who don't like shouting, who probably have the most to give, won't be heard or won't be understood or won't be communicating. So it's that, well, the thing I have learned about marketing that I quite like is doing marketing does not guarantee you business. but doing no marketing more or less guarantees you won't get any business. And marketing, not in the sense of going to social media, but just talking, people being aware of who you are. If no one is aware of who you are, then no one will come to you for your help because they don't know who you are. But shouting about who you are and sharing about who you are and talking about who you are still won't guarantee you any business. But at least there's a chance that someone might find you. So that's, I think, this kind of uncomfortable space because of the platforms that we currently use, or we currently think are the only ways to communicate with other people. And there may be other ways.
I think that is that channel is a really important conversation, right? Because I do think that nowadays when we talk about finding your voice, we immediately think about socials. We don't think about search, because search is also like, it's become so search engine optimized sort of game. There's no one who's just blogging their heart out without doing some keyword research, probably. But finding the channel that works for your voice is, I think, really important. Right? There's people who do super well in one-on-one conversations. There's people who do better in written situations. I know people who write really, really good opinion articles and get that into Stanford Social Innovation Review, which then acts as a distributor of your voice. And so I think one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is just turn off the automatic assumption that we're talking about social media when we talk about our voices. So, and I think also to Kelly's point, like, people knowing that they have the answers, I feel like that is also a social media symptom, because like, yeah, everyone's jumping on the opinion bandwagon. And yeah, I think that idea of like practicing what is my channel, practicing your voice on different channels, one of which is in person, is an important thing to do. To the point of Anna with AI, so people now turning to ChatGPT to, generate their voice. What are the ways, Carlos, in which you found you're able to cut through those?
Well, so is this cut through the noise that because of how people can now use AI to create content?
So I guess what I'm saying is the world is only going to get noisier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of us, in a way, like while we're finding our voice, we're also trying to find how to cut through noise, either by finding different channels, and I'm curious if there's something that you found to really work, where you're able to cut through noise and you're able to catch people's attention. What works for you?
I don't have any answers in terms of catching people's attention. Well, it depends where I'm trying to catch their attention. What I gravitate towards are smaller spaces like this, spaces like Mighty Networks, spaces that are more curated in the sense that they are, I believe, people like me are going to be hanging around there. And so rather than depending on these massive platforms where everyone is hanging out, not ignore them, but at the same time not rely on them, where can I find the spaces where I can have more considered, nuanced conversations? Because that's the kind of person I am. I like considered, nuanced conversations. I won't go to the places that have very simplistic, highly opinionated, unforgiving conversations. But fundamentally, it's like, where are the smaller conversations, more intimate conversations happening? And intimate could be, in this world of billions of people on a platform, could be 100 or 1,000. It doesn't necessarily just 5 or 6, but I do like to find spaces where everyone has a chance to say something, an input and share a question or a thought, because then that's where, a bit like this, conversation can evolve based on who's here rather than on one person's opinion of what's right. So yeah, I think this is because there's two things we're talking about. We're finding our own voice, which is, what do I want to say that I believe in, that I think is important, that feels authentic, that I feel confident, or not even confident, that I have the courage to say. And then there's, how do I find more people who either, because there's two things here as well, either people, how do I reach the people who could be my customers, or how could I reach more people to take this action that I believe is necessary in the world? But how do I reach more people, I think, is the thing. And one of the things I remember from a workshop I did with Tad Hargrave, who runs a thing called Marketing for Hippies. Lovely reframing of marketing that is a bit more loving and accepting of the human experience. But he says human beings are not built to self-promote unless you're a psychopath. It's not in our nature. But what we love to do is talk about other people. So by finding our own voice and finding smaller spaces to share that voice and to be able to talk about the things we want to talk about with confidence and to communicate, not just be heard, but communicate ideas that will help others. And then make it easier for those people who heard or we communicated with then to share that with other people and point them to us. Then that is a way to reach people that isn't about shouting on social media. I think it's about.
That's very much what Kelly is trying to do in the education space, no?
Kelly, please share.
Kelly mentioned that she's not in a good audio situation.
Okay.
Yeah, how is the audio? Is it okay? Is there distraction in the back?
Not too much.
No, you can't hear.
Oh,
it doesn't work.
Up. Okay. Yeah, so Nina, maybe you can explain a bit more what you meant by Kelly's work.
Yeah, I think you can try, Kelly, because we did hear you. But as far as, I mean, Kelly was in my cohort, in my little personal branding tribe, and she basically senses, within the community of educators, teachers, people working in the education space in her state, I think in the US, that need for, how do I deal as a burned out, heavily pressured teacher or educator? How do I deal with this sense of constant overwhelm? One way could be to just leave it, right, and drop out and retrain ourselves. But I think what she's seeking to do is to provide a space, a community that is more really offers personal tools and an exchange and some kind of heaven to for reflection, and maybe equip those members with better tools and resources to cope with their stressful work environment, or to consciously move towards the exit as an educator. And she's been, I think, navigating in the past weeks, and still is what exactly her offering is. But I do, I sense it probably resonates with her, that that notion of not just adding more, as in oh, here's another platform, here's another network, and let me help you, here's your solution, 1, 2, 3, but really more holding the complexity and just, discussing what the individual experiences are. And that is already, beyond nurturing and, oh yeah, thanks, somebody is listening, I feel seen already. That is, I think, an alternative of in the same style you just described.
Mm.
And I do think I also actually just on the last, and then I've stopped, on Tuesday evening, I actually intended exactly that type of gathering in Amsterdam, on the social impact founder, etc., a in-person gathering of only 20 people, by invitation, really coming together, and then World Cafe style facilitation. And it felt very different. And it was, gave us very different energy when I left 2 hours later than having done that online, or just, and I didn't know anyone before, but it really felt like you could, address and discuss and muse over questions in a more intimate setting very differently than if that would have been just in this open white space.
Reminds me really of the fact that, like, people don't like to be a target audience, just the word target. Like, I hear a lot of people talk about the TA, and it reminds me, like, oh yeah, so you're putting a mark on someone's head and you're trying to help them, rather than that you're including them in the conversation. And I feel like for all the people who are overwhelmed at the thought of, speaking their opinion and adding their voice to the conversation, there's a lot of people who want to be included if they are being included. And that's a very different approach to communication. So, like, do you want to put messages out there that a lot of people like? Are you the kind of person who adds the artificial, like, oh, what do you think? Add in the comments. Are you actually genuinely trying to have a conversation with people? And if you're going for the last option, then what you're describing is a wonderful way to actually have meaningful engagement with people, rather than, like, what are 800 likes worth compared to having met one person who has heard what you said, who's included, and who's, like, having a chance to experience you as a whole person, and will probably that your name and your person will be with them for a longer time than the one fleeting life.
I would like to add, though, as well, as I'm thinking maybe from just a, I'm trying to think the best word, not pragmatic or practical, just the way it is that 800 likes on a post might mean you do meet the person you need to talk to, because they turn up on their radar, or you turn up on their radar. And so it's kind of like, maybe even think of it in terms of when people think about money, it isn't the amount of money, it isn't the amount of likes that you're looking for. It isn't like, oh shit, I didn't hit 800 likes, so it's a really crap post. It's like what that means in terms of who you could then access, how people could find you. And so I think I felt the need to just say, if you're able to create a post that goes viral, amazing. Because then that means 1 person, 5 people, 10 people who really need to talk to you are more likely to find you. Because the other aspect of this is a long game. The more intimate, nuanced, personal, considered approach. The platforms that exist are amazing when you get them right, to having a wide reach very quickly. If you get the right post right, if you get the right message right, if the algorithm treats you well, there's something super helpful there, particularly if you're a one-man band, someone who doesn't have the infrastructure of larger organizations. And so there's an appreciation that these platforms work this way. And I think in terms of this journey of finding your own voice, this could potentially be a lifelong journey. And there's a quote that I loved, I'm going to put it in the chat, which is linked to finding your own voice. And I think about purpose. It's like, what are the questions that are so big that only your life can answer? Not just your life, I mean, your lifetime can answer. And to be able to think about, wow, if it's my lifetime, I can't be addressing everything. I need to be addressing 1, 2, 3 things that I really believe in, which is about my own story, my own connection to it, my own voice, because then I can really work on that, and I'm committed to that. And if you're committed to that long enough, then I think not only will you find your own voice, lots of people will not only hear but understand that voice. That's,
I relate to this idea of this being a lifetime of work, because I think we go through cycles in the same way, Carlos, that you said earlier, like you've gone through a series of existential crises, and that powers or that drives your search also for your voice. But as you keep kind of running into new crises, you have to adapt your story for yourself and your story for the outside world. And so I think, you know, at some
and on
point you're
top
going
of
to
that,
get comfortable and you're going to get uncomfortable again. because you're gonna
exactly.
have
And I now am an expert in existential crises. So if anyone who
You've
has a
made it work.
professional, exactly, that's what I mean. It's like, if you have a professional existential crisis, I can talk to you about what that feels like and what you can do to shift that.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah.
where thinking back at the stories and the journeys and trying to weave those threads can help, I think, help us find that voice and find that question that you want to answer. Or not even find that question, realize, oh shit, that's the question I've been answering for the past 30, 40 years.
Yeah, I think this connecting the dots thing is also so powerful, because I think very often what I notice is that when we think about work, we disconnect it from the personal journey, right? And when I first had to tell stories, I was always telling the story of the design agency that I was working for. And I remember a moment where I'd worked for two rather well-known agencies, and then I was in South Korea and I had to present myself. And my old boss was there. And he listened to the story, and of course he recognized so much of his story in it. And afterwards he came up to me and he's like, yeah, I'm expecting you, like you're heading in the right direction, but I want to see so more of you and have such high expectations. But he was totally right. Like I was still telling someone else's story, but that's also because I had to still go through experiences that would ripen and mature my opinions and my vision. And that just takes a while. And one of the things I took away from all of those experiences is that you can't develop your voice if you're not using it. So if I would have waited until I had my own story to tell, I would have never had the practice along the way. And still to this day, like I noticed it with Wenju is sick. If you're willing and able to come, you're welcome. But like she's early in her career, like she's now been with us for 4 or 5 years. And you're also very much in that process, right? Like, what is your voice, and like how do you relate to like the story of Brand the Change and your own story, which is going to be very different in a number of years than the story maybe that is in front of you now. Sorry, that wasn't really a question, I guess.
No, but yeah, I do identify with that. And I think even as I'm listening to other people's story, I think even Carlos's story of coming from a background of a scientific background, I resonate with a lot of that as well, where we were in school. So I was coming from tech, where I could see people doing such amazing things, but not really being able to sell that. And then just feeling like I was constantly the person who was like, hey, this is so amazing. Can we explain this better? Can we sell this better? Can we convince people what it is we are working on or what we're trying to build? But yeah, and along coming into Brand the Change as well, there's a lot of that is very closely tied. I think to me, emotionally in the story of my career as well, on what my voice is and how I'm trying to navigate or communicate what it is I'm trying to achieve with my work. And yeah, I guess check back in 5 years and let's see how that will have evolved.
Can't wait. I want to have a time machine and do it. So one of the things, I guess, Wenju, I'm going to build a little bridge from you back to Carlos. Yeah, who only has a few minutes left. So Wenju, like you have taken a lot of opportunities to develop your voice. Like you came in, you started on posts, you started on things, now you're writing whole case studies and having your own particular areas of interest. Carlos, I was curious, do you ever in your programs or in the Happy Startup School community? Do you have experiments or exercises that you would recommend to people? Little things that they can try out to test their voice, that would, that are maybe less intimidating, that are ways to spark ideas about your voice.
The thing that springs to mind straight away is this story of change canvas that we put together. And it just breaks down the idea of describing a change in your life, something that's been significant and beneficial. And we break it down into sort of 6 chapters or 6 elements. The first one being, where were you at the beginning? How did it feel? What was going on in your life? What was going on, particularly around this specific change? And so for me, running a digital agency, feeling burnt out, having the ups and downs of cash flow to manage, as well as a small team. So the second stage, which is what motivated you to change. At that point, Lawrence was not enjoying being a designer anymore for clients. He wanted to do something different, or he was exploring different products and started thinking about the Happy Startup School. And at some point, we were running 2 things in parallel, and he said, we either do one thing or the other, or try and do them both at the same time. And doing both at the same time meant me working in the agency maybe, and him working in the Happy Startup School. That wasn't a choice for me. I couldn't do that. So we quit the agency and I joined him to build a Happy Startup School. What got in my way? That's the third section. What got in your way of this process of change? Well, for me, it was, if I'm not a technical architect, programmer, web developer, who am I? What do I have to contribute here? What is it? And also, how are we going to make any money? We had a stable business, and now we're doing something that has no real business model. And is this allowed? Am I allowed to do this? This doesn't look like a real business. Stage 4 is, what did you learn? And what help did you get along the way? So through the Happy Startup School summer camp, through retreats and talks and meeting coaches and wizards and witches and all sorts of strange people, I started to learn about a new way of looking at life that wasn't linear, that was thinking of it more as a journey of exploration, thinking of business less as a way of making money, but as a journey of self-discovery. And that started to turn my head. So that's stage 4. And these people helped me see that. I remember talking to a woman called Christine Rain, who now does a podcast on the heroine's journey, which is amazing, who taught me about empathic storytelling. I remember learning about nonviolent communication through her. I remember learning about the map of meaning, a way of understanding what meaning means. Charles Davies, who taught us about his clarity courses and also our relationship to money. So all these new things I learned. So that was stage 4. Stage 5, what did I need to do? I needed to be courageous. I needed to let go of this thing, this idea that I am a scientist or I am a tech person. I needed to be more open to serendipity. I needed to be less controlling. I needed to be able to call myself something else other than a tech guy, which means maybe calling myself a coach. And then the final stage is, where did you get to? I built a Happy Startup School with Lawrence. We now run retreats, we run summer camps, and I don't do any programming. I don't build platforms anymore. And I happily call myself a coach. And my time is no longer based on other people's projects. It's based on what I want to do and with who I want to do it. So that's an illustration of like, oh, that's my voice. That's my journey of transition of identity. Stage 1, where did I start? Stage 2, what motivated the change? Stage 3, what was holding me back? Stage 4, what help did I get along the way? Stage 5, what did I have to do to make this happen? And stage 6, what was the final situation? Where did I get to? And I think that's sorry, there's different ways you can use that story at a big and small level to just start thinking about your past.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carlos. I know you need to go get your daughter. Hard exit. Or she will be telling the story later of her father who forgot to.
I hope not. Yes, well, thank you very much, Anna. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for indulging me by allowing me to share my voice with you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the session. And take care.
Thanks, Carlos.
Bye-bye.
I just wanted to share for those of you who have a few more minutes. So if there are experiments of telling your own story or giving an opinion that you want to run within the community before putting something out there, we're always very happy to respond to that. So I know that when I first started telling the story of Brand of Change, which wasn't called Brand of Change yet, so the most helpful things happened from community that was then part of Think, and people just hearing my story and asking the question. So you're just very welcome. Feel invited if you want to try out a couple of stuff. I think it's let up a balloon here and there of a thought that you're going to feel welcome to do. It's really helpful. I took a photo of Carlos's 6 steps for the story of change that I'll share. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. Was there anyone who had some thoughts or questions or comments that weren't addressed? Well, now that we're all here.
Maybe just a final reflection, as you know, he also mentioned now, like, you know, courage, and that it really does take courage to explore, you know, like your own unique voice beyond this linear thinking, also with regard to our, you know, like career trajectory, where I think, you know, like it does involve a high degree of risk, you know, of like maybe seeking, you know, to define yourself or how you show up in the world differently than your neighbors or your peers, or people not understanding, like, why are you making it so complicated, or why don't you just, you know, continue this job or just seek employment. I mean, and like to really like be courageous also in I think of recognizing that maybe it's their unease, you know, and not yours. It doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong just because they don't understand, or because I have a trouble, like, what do you do? And I'm like, yeah, that's a bit difficult to say, to explain what, you know, that doesn't mean like that I'm messy. It's just different, or a bit more, you know, in a non-linear way. And especially, you know, if you already have like some years of experience, like I'm in my mid-40s, all the time, like weekly, I have this thought like, oh, I'm supposed to do this. Well, everyone seems to have arrived somewhere, and I'm just about to start something new. And that is uncomfortable. And so just maybe accepting like, oh yeah, it's uncomfortable, but I'm still here.
Yeah, and so many people are looking at you and thinking like, oh, I wish I was starting something new right now. So you never know. That's really lovely reminder. Yeah. Anyone else? Last thing.
I think to what Nina said, I heard a Chinese proverb. I think it said, tension is who you think you should be, and relaxation is who you are. And that kind of made me think of, let's say, a guitar. I play my guitar. You can't play a guitar with like fully tense, tight strings, and you can't play it with like fully relaxed, loose strings either. It's got to be somewhere in the middle. So I think it's basically this dance that we have to play between, I guess, being relaxed and accepting who we are right now without trying to change it per se. Plus, at the same time, I guess, dancing with that sort of, I guess, tension, or that, you know, the intensity or pressure for growth as well. I think that's the balance that I'm trying to find. I find it tricky to, I guess, balance. because in the world, you're conditioned to believe in this one version of success, and once you chase that version, you realize that that's not your version that aligns with you, who you are. But then now you're trying to kind of realign that conditioned version with like what you've discovered for yourself. And I think that's where the confusion arises for me. Like, how do I start to merge those and blend them together?
That reminds me of my 5-year-old, who, when we're doing drawings together, she looks at mine, she's like, this is so much better. And I'm just going to give up. And then she walks away. And then I try to rationalize with her. I'm a little bit older. I spent 4 years at art school drawing every single day for an hour. But of course, the rational doesn't kick in. And I think sometimes I feel that way. And I think it's so beautiful when you said, I wrote down, tension is what you think, what you should be, and relaxation is who you are. Like, I look at stuff that other people are creating at that moment, and I compare it to myself, and I don't think about like what's their journey with it. And there was something in one of the documents, I think Tad Hargrove has a document on who am I to teach, like who am I to teach a certain topic. And one of the pages in there, and I'll see if I can find specific wisdom that we shared in there, was like, it took someone many years to get to this point. And that's okay, like, but just keep practicing. And I think you just reminded me that you also need to enjoy that practice, and enjoy playing the guitar, even if it doesn't sound like, you could be giving a fantastic concert tomorrow, but that should not take away the enjoyment of playing the guitar. So thanks for that. And I'll try and tell my daughter this. They're going to kick me out of the office soon. Thank you so much for joining me today. If anyone has any more thoughts on this and wants to practice things this way, we're so excited to set up something.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all.
Bye.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. That was fun.
Thanks, you too.